My girlfriend humiliated me by rejecting my proposal, so I shocked everyone by proposing to her best friend instead. Hey Reddit. I had everything planned down to the smallest detail. The location was perfect, a romantic, upscale restaurant with an intimate atmosphere. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the table, and the violinist in the corner was ready to play our song. I had even arranged for a small group of our closest friends to be seated nearby, waiting for the big moment. Emily, my girlfriend of 3 years, had always loved romantic gestures, and I was sure that this proposal would be everything she had dreamed of. I'd been saving for months, carefully picking out the perfect engagement ring, the one she had pointed out months earlier when we casually browsed a jewelry store. It was a beautiful diamond set in white gold, elegant but not gaudy. I had every reason to believe that Emily would say yes. We'd talked about the future countless times. We discussed moving in together, getting married, having kids. We even joked about how many pets we'd have. She had always talked about wanting a family, a wedding, and a life built together. Every sign pointed to her saying yes. I had even gone so far as to ask her best friend, Claire, for advice about the proposal, just to ensure that it would be perfect. As I got down on one knee, I felt a rush of nerves and excitement. The room grew silent, the only sound being the faint strings of the violin playing in the background. Emily's eyes widened as I took her hand in mine, the ring box opened between us. The moment was here. This was it, the culmination of years of love and dreams. I could see her expression soften, the tears welling in her eyes, and I felt my heart swell with hope. I could already picture the smile on her face as she whispered yes. But instead of the expected joy, I was hit with something completely unexpected. Emily started laughing. Not a shy, nervous laugh, but a loud, almost mocking laugh. I froze, my heart dropping into my stomach. It was as if the entire restaurant stopped breathing. The violinist faltered mid-note, the sound hanging in the air like a ghost. The waiter, who had been hovering nearby, froze in place, his hand still gripping the tray of champagne flutes. She's laughing, I thought in disbelief. I could feel my pulse quickening as she continued to laugh, her hand over her mouth, as if I were the punchline to some joke I didn't understand. Oh my God, she gasped, still giggling. You actually thought I would say yes? The words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed up. I stood there, ring in hand, as the silence enveloped me. My ears were ringing. People were looking at me, no, staring at me, as if I were some kind of fool. She kept going, completely oblivious to the humiliation she was causing me. You're sweet, she said, her voice still dripping with laughter, but we're not ready for this. I mean, look at us. You don't even have your life together yet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had a steady job, a decent income, a home. What did she mean I didn't have my life together? It was as if everything I had worked for, everything I had done for us, meant nothing. It felt like she was stripping away every ounce of self-worth I had in front of a crowd of strangers and friends. My hands were shaking. I could feel my face burning with a mixture of shock, anger, and sadness. The worst part? The worst part was that Emily didn't seem to care. She was still laughing, still acting like I was some naive fool who didn't understand the reality of our relationship. The room was dead silent now. The people at our table, our closest friends, looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between Emily and me. Claire, Emily's best friend, was sitting beside her. I looked at her for support, for some sign that this was just a bad joke, but Claire's face mirrored mine, utter shock and disbelief. She was staring at Emily like she had just slapped me across the face. It was then that something inside me shifted. The hurt, the embarrassment, the disbelief, it all transformed into something else. I was angry. Angry at Emily for belittling me in front of everyone, angry at myself for believing her lies, angry at the entire situation. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I turned to Claire. And without thinking, I did the unthinkable. Claire, I said, my voice suddenly steady, my words firm. Will you marry me instead? There was a moment of pure silence. Then, a collective gasp filled the air. I could hear the clinking of silverware, the whispers from nearby tables, the stunned expressions on the faces around us. Emily's face turned ashen, her mouth hanging open in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Claire looked frozen, her eyes darting between Emily and me. Me? She whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied, my gaze unwavering. You're kind, you're loyal, and unlike some people, you actually respect me. I could feel Emily's fury radiating across the room. She stood up so quickly that her chair almost toppled over. Are you out of your mind? She shouted. This is insane. You can't just propose to her. But I didn't care. I was done. Done with the humiliation, done with the lies, done with the person I had thought would be my partner forever. Claire, still in shock, took a step back. She glanced at Emily, then back at me, her expression searching for something. Maybe she was waiting for me to retract my words, to tell her it was a joke. But I didn't. I watched her face slowly soften as she took in what I had said. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. The room erupted. Some people clapped, others gasped in disbelief, and others just stared at us in stunned silence. Emily, meanwhile, looked like she had just been slapped. Her face flushed bright red with anger. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with pure rage. Are you serious? She spat. You're both insane. I can't believe this. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the restaurant, her footsteps echoing as she fled the scene. I stood there, still in shock, as Claire and I exchanged a glance. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air. I had expected some kind of relief, but instead, I felt numb. I had no idea what came next. But one thing was for sure, this wasn't over. The silence that followed Emily's departure was deafening. I stood there in the midst of a crowded restaurant, the hum of conversation abruptly halted, the air thick with tension. Claire and I were alone in the center of it all, the spotlight on us as the gravity of the situation began to settle. People had slowly started whispering, stealing glances our way, unsure of what to make of the scene that had just unfolded. I could see their judgment in their eyes, some of it disbelief, some of it curiosity, and others. Well, they seemed to be waiting for something more dramatic. But what could be more dramatic than this? I took a deep breath, still trying to process everything. I'd never imagined this kind of outcome. I'd pictured myself surrounded by tears of joy, a celebration of love. Instead, Emily had walked out, humiliated me in front of our friends, and now I had proposed to her best friend. It felt like the world had turned upside down, and the worst part was, this was only the beginning. Claire hadn't said a word since she agreed to marry me. She stood there, her wide eyes scanning the room, her hands fidgeting nervously at her sides. For the first time, I noticed the way her lips trembled, as if she were on the verge of crying herself. Was this really happening? Could we actually go through with this? I reached for her hand, gently pulling her towards me. Claire? I asked softly, my voice a mix of uncertainty and determination. Are you sure about this? She hesitated for a moment before giving me a small, uncertain nod. I don't know, she whispered. I've never done anything like this before. I know, I said, cutting her off, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. But I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you because I care about you. You've always been there for me when Emily wasn't. You're the one who helped me when I needed support, the one who told me to go for it, even when I had doubts. And now, I'm doing this because it feels right. Her face softened, the tension in her posture slowly easing as she processed my words. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation that still lingered there. But slowly, it seemed like she was coming to terms with the choice she had made. I know I shouldn't be in this situation. You're right, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I've always been the one watching from the sidelines, never wanting to interfere with you and Emily. But this feels like it's meant to be, doesn't it? I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. It does. We stood there for a long moment, our hands still entwined, the world around us fading as I thought about how much everything had changed in the span of just a few minutes. People were still staring at us, but I didn't care. This was my decision, and I was going to follow through. I had no intention of turning back. Then, before I knew it, Claire took a deep breath and spoke again. So, what now? That question hung in the air. What now? We had shocked everyone, turned a public proposal into a private spectacle, and now we had to face the consequences. What was next? I looked at her, my gaze steady. Now, we leave. We'll go home, talk things through, figure out what comes next. But I want you to know, Claire, I don't regret what I did. Not for a second. She smiled faintly, though I could see the uncertainty still clouding her eyes. Me neither. But we have to deal with what happens next, right? I chuckled softly, though the humor didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, I suppose we do. We walked out of the restaurant together, hand in hand, the cool night air hitting us as we stepped outside. The drive home was quiet, but in the silence, I could feel a strange sense of relief washing over me. I had done something that I never thought I would, something that I never imagined could happen. But as we sat in the car, it felt like the beginning of something new. When we finally arrived at my apartment, Claire and I sat down on the couch. The weight of everything, of the rejection, the proposal, the fallout, was starting to hit me, and I could feel my exhaustion creeping in. But there was something else, too. A sense of clarity. I was no longer carrying the burden of trying to make something work that was clearly broken. I had freed myself from the chains of a relationship that wasn't serving me. Claire sat beside me, her posture still guarded but more at ease than I'd seen her in a while. I could see the wariness in her eyes, the lingering uncertainty about what our decision meant. But she wasn't pushing me away. She was still here, sitting beside me, and that meant everything. "What happens when Emily finds out?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. I sighed, rubbing my forehead. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?" I couldn't imagine the look on Emily's face when she found out. The fury, the betrayal, the disbelief. But I had no intention of hiding from her. She had made her choice by rejecting me, publicly humiliating me, and there was no turning back now. I had already taken the first step toward a new life, and I wasn't about to let her dictate my future. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice firmer this time. "Together." Claire nodded, though I could tell she was still processing everything. "I'm glad you're sure about this," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't want to be the one who ruins everything for you." I turned to her, my expression softening. "You're not ruining anything. You're helping me rebuild." The days that followed were filled with more uncertainty than I ever could have imagined. The fallout from the proposal hit harder than I expected. Emily tried to reach out, bombarding me with texts and calls, but I ignored them. I couldn't bring myself to face her. Not after everything that had happened. Eventually, Claire and I sat down and talked things through, really understanding what we had just done and what it meant for both of us. We had taken a huge risk, one that would change the course of both our lives. But despite the complications and the inevitable confrontation with Emily, I knew in my heart that this was where I was meant to be. With Claire. And just like that, my life with Emily, one I had thought was my future, came to an end. But the life ahead of me with Claire? That was just beginning.